Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with some great guests that I think you're really going to enjoy. Don Lemon was arrested. That's not the subject of the stream. I just wanted to say it because it's that great. We'll talk to everybody about that in a second. But the core topic of this stream is the problem of libertarians. Once again, sadly, libertarians have largely failed us on the issue of immigration. And I want to talk about why it seems like there's always this impulse, even among libertarians who say that they support border security, to when it comes time to actually do the thing, actually have border security, we always seem to run into this problem. Joining me today to discuss those topics is the very last decent libertarian, Jeffrey Kauffman, one of the leaders of the Free State Project. Thank you so much for coming on, man.
Hey, it's great to be here with you. I'm probably going to agree and disagree with you some here, but we'll hash it out.
Absolutely. And of course, one of the best guys to have if you're going to be mocking anyone, it is Spoon from the Aristocratic Utensil. Thank you so much for coming on, man.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's good to be here. Good to poke fun at the hell of the current times that we live in.
Well, before we jump into the libertarian question, I do just want to get everyone's reaction to the Don Lemon arrest, because I'm going to be honest. I staked my public support for the Trump administration on them arresting these people. I was like, look, if you can't arrest these guys when they like absolutely film themselves violating federal law and, talk about it, boast about it, talk about how they're there to terrorize children. Like, if you can't bust these people, you just can't get anyone. And for a minute there, it didn't look great. We had judges turning down, refusing to sign grand jury indictments, arrest warrants, those kind of things. But the Trump administration did stick to it. They did stay through it. Don Lemon has been arrested. Now, it's very likely that some judge somewhere, whenever this finally goes to trial, is going to find some excuse to cut Lemon and the those others who have been arrested loose. However, the Trump administration did the thing that a lot of people said they would not do. So, Jeremy, what do you think about Lemon's arrest? Do you think it's justified? Do you think that this is ultimately a positive step? Do you think it'll stick?
As a real libertarian, I probably should properly consult and read all of the laws, but it certainly superficially looks like a violation of the law to me. Someone posted something like, what is the Trump administration, is our new government just going to be whatever Matt Walsh tweets? And I was like, that actually wouldn't be the worst form of government. Like, I could imagine worse forms of government than that. So if that's where we're at, I'm okay with it. This stuff has been one-sided for so long. I'm happy to see it happening the other way.
And what about you, Spoon? Do you think that the Democrats or the left are going to get energized by this? I mean, he's a heckin' journalist. They're violating the First Amendment. Next thing you know, they'll come for the Somalians.
Oh, God, if only. I don't think the left will ever be quite that base. But, I think the case with Don, and frankly, any sort of violation of any constitutional rights or frankly, any human rights at all, I think one of the reasons why the right cheers it is they've been considered the sort of beautiful losers for God knows how long. But basically anything that the state does that looks, I wouldn't say authoritarian, just like it runs a functioning state, is just something they would cheer for, regardless of how heavy-handed it looks, which I'm going to be honest, I have really, really, really high tolerance of what ICE isn't able to do at this point, just because, like, dude, just look at it. Like, how do you not? I won't say like openly cheer it, but at some point you have to go, okay, the state's getting a bit heavy-handed, but this is what we voted for.
Well, I think
at some point you got to let it go.
Well, I think you just have this issue where you have had the left have free reign for so long and the right has done so little that even just equal enforcement of the laws we have looks authoritarian to some people, right? Because they just expect that they get away with things. Of course, we do that when we're in power, but Republicans are never going to do that. Conservatives are never going to do that. And you'd let it go long enough and things have to snap back the other direction pretty hard. So if you let tens of millions of illegals into the country, it's going to be hard to remove them. Like it would have been easy to remove them when it was 500,000 or a million, but now it's 20, 30, probably more million. And so it's going to take more. It's the scale itself is going to increase the difficulty of these operations and the amount of authority that you have to wield to do it. So I think that's kind of the natural give and take. You can't ignore the law for 30 years. And then when the law is actually enforced, go, oh no, I can't believe we have laws again. Like that just doesn't make sense. But
yeah, and they're actually enforced.
Right, exactly. But that leads us to our larger question, right? The true purpose of this stream was the libertarian question. And this is one of those scenarios where, of course, like half of libertarians don't even believe in borders because that's something the state does, and we don't want the state to exist, or they shouldn't be stopping the free movement of people. There are left-wing libertarians who are very vocal about this, but even others on the right who will say the same thing. And so there's already and this is like the frustration with everyone sharing the title of libertarian, because if you say the libertarians believe this, all of a sudden you have 19 different factions of libertarians saying, of course they don't believe this. It's like, well, since there are 19 factions of you, I really only have one thing I can say, right? Like I work pretty hard to distance myself from like Newt Gingrich and Lindsey Graham, and to the point where I try not to even call myself a conservative when I can avoid it. It's just so confusing to me that libertarians insist on like all sharing this name while like violently disagreeing about like what it means. However, those that even do seem to support borders will come out and say, but not like this, right? Like I supported having borders until someone got arrested. I supported having borders until we started fining a business or putting a tax on remittances. It just seems like theoretically borders are okay, but any action the state would take to incentivize illegals not to be here or to remove them is all of a sudden a problem. So I guess Jeremy, as our representative of this tribe, what is going on with the libertarian mindset? Why is it so hard to have borders as a libertarian?
All right, so I find a lot of these people annoying as well, but to defend them a little bit, because I think there is an impulse at the heart of even the left libertarians who, I think they're very foolish and stupid, and I disagree with them. I think there is an impulse here that is good and that should be recognized as good, which is this concept of desiring this sort of universal fairness, of I'm going to have this system, this ethical philosophy, and I'm going to be very consistent in how I apply it. This is a good impulse. What these people don't recognize is this is a very rare impulse that exists in a very tiny amount of people.
Right.
And so if you are naive about that second part of it, you're going to get very bad outcomes. Your country is going to be overrun by people who don't think like you, who don't act like you, and the things that you liked are not going to exist anymore. And so that's the first part of it that I'm always trying to get through the libertarians' heads, which is like, other people aren't you, other people don't hold your values, other people don't think like you, and for a lot of these people, there's nothing you could have ever done. You're never going to get the average Somalian or Haitian to be expressing and thinking about the world as you do, and you've got to reconcile your own beliefs with that reality. And that's part of why I'm here in New Hampshire as part of this new libertarian concentration strategy, where we're much more realistic about the feasibility of libertarianism, sort of writ large as being this philosophy for everyone. The second part of it, and this is more the types who would say, hey, I'm for borders, but not like that, is, libertarians are very used to being critics of the state, of being critics of the government. It's easy to slip into that frame of it's the jackboot. And I have got a little bit of that in me. It hasn't been entirely eliminated, by the way. But it's like, there are so many people, there's so many interactions that are going to happen. And this idea that every single one of them, has to go completely perfectly is just very unrealistic. You see similar criticisms in foreign policy where it's like, okay, well, how would you conduct this war? How would you conduct this action? Where it's like, it all has to be done perfectly. Well, it's like, well, I'm not sure that that's feasible in reality. And so it's just this frame of sort of wanting everything to go perfectly. And I think it's unrealistic. It doesn't necessarily excuse it, by the way. Like, I would still take the position that, like, sure, the Alex Preddy interaction, like, could have gone better. Like, that wasn't an ideal outcome. I'm not going to, like, cry for him and say we need to abolish ICE because it happened. But like, I am still like, that wasn't the ideal way the state acts to me. You know, like that I think that could have been done better. Okay, that is still a position that I hold. So that's what I think sort of explains this dynamic.
Yeah, I think you're right that's certainly a big part of it. Is like there is just that. Well, if the state is taking an action, then just reflexively, I snap back into my immediate political programming, and I get that. I have this with conservatives all the time. Yeah, they're the slogans that they've heard over and over again, and so when they see something happen, they just apply a slogan. That's the heuristic. That's what they know, and I have to explain to them like, no, we actually need to think through this issue. Does this help us here? Does this actually move us forward, acquire us power, somehow forward one of our objectives or principles, not just immediately going back to that like rote nonsense of, okay, I saw something and I repeat a phrase or a formula and then I move forward. And in a lot of ways, this is the issue with much of libertarianism is, as you say, it's for specific people. I do love, I think it was, was it Carl Benjamin who said that like liberalism is Sharia law for English people? Like it's just their natural way of being. Like
Land has a similar quote. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's in a way, libertarians are the people who just they have a tradition, but they just don't understand its particular like to them. Like there's a specific thing. It's I think it was Curtis Yarvin who described libertarians as like a beautiful prey animal, like a gazelle, like it's majestic, but if someone doesn't protect it, it's just going to get itself eaten. You love it.
We've got a little bit more a spine, a little bit more muscle in New Hampshire, but I do agree that this is true of a lot of them.
Yeah. So Spoon, I guess, why is it so hard to ultimately get that the interaction question that Jeremy was talking about? Like, I think we can agree that, I think the Goody shooting was a clean shoot. Like that's exactly what you should do if someone's attempting to run you over. End of story. This one, the Peretti one, again, I wouldn't call it a bad shoot necessarily. I would say it's a far more complex scenario. I think it's very clear that the officers did not know that the person had been armed, that there is this negligent discharge of the firearm when it was removed. Everyone kind of just triggered. Like there's a lot of extenuating circumstances. And obviously Peretti was specifically trying to manufacture this outcome. We saw him, with other videos escalating with the police multiple days beforehand, assaulting, spitting on ICE officers, kicking their car, breaking the taillight. Like this is not some peaceful guy who happened to wander into a high pressure situation. He was looking for exactly this. And yet somehow it just is very hard to explain to people like, yeah, you're not going to get a perfect police interaction every time. I understand this doesn't look great, but like when people specifically go out of the way to manufacture this situation, how much of this is on them? And, can you really expect to just like stop all ICE operations because of it?
Yeah, no, it's sort of the one thing that I find very irritating about these kinds of situations, because I've noticed, particularly with the good shooting as well, but I think it's similar to this one, which is when I look at like this entire interaction overall, it just strikes me as bizarre that everyone focuses on like the split second of aggression and no one pauses and goes, the person who got shot, just how much of what you just did to lead up to this situation could you have avoided if you were just, I don't know, not there? Just strikes me as just insane that you have this person who goes out of the way. I mean, I understand the Second Amendment, the right to protest and all this stuff, but it strikes me as bizarre when you go, okay, this person was there a couple of days ago, destroying vehicles, kicking it. Just, I don't understand how you protest the state when it's what the state is actually supposed to do. That to me is when the right to protest kind of goes out the window and started losing steam in theory. So when I sort of look at that perspective of, okay, how much of what you are doing is A, stupid, is that you were literally just protesting what the state is supposed to do, and you're doing it in a very unsavory manner. It's that kind of situation that when they get shot, anyone who's looking at the situation from just a perspective of, is this person good for my nation? No. That's when the sympathy starts to just go out the window. And I feel that's when It ultimately, for me, I think it boils down to who gets animated by what. Is how many people will justify it versus how many people will kick up a fuss that it's not justified. And it really just goes back and forth to that. Because I feel at the end of the day, it's just who will use power to enforce their morality is when it boils down to.
Well, it's just the scenario where I get it. Like, I specifically didn't like, and I said so, the way that a number of people were approaching the Second Amendment question in this. Like, a lot of people, oh, he had a gun with multiple magazines. Oh, it was a military style gun because it had a threaded barrel. No, guys, it's just a gun. And, I have, I carry very similar setups. I've been doing it for decades at this point. And you know what? I've managed to never get in a fight with a police officer while I have a gun on me. Like, I carry a gun legally. It's not a problem. Like, even if I have had a situation where like a police officer will pull me over because I was going through a stop sign or something wrong, like, I am very careful if I have a gun on me on how I interact with anyone, but especially the law. And this is just not an issue. You're fine to protest. You're fine to have a firearm on you. But he's obviously going well beyond that. I've never kicked a car with a police officer. I've never spit on a police officer. I've certainly never dove between a police officer and someone that they are trying to interact with while armed. And I would not be surprised if I did any of that stuff to end up in a bad situation. Now, again, like I said, maybe the officer shouldn't go that far, but this is just the conversation with like a minority stop, right? Same thing. Yeah, maybe a police officer is overzealous with a young black guy he pulls over. Maybe you can make that case. But if you as a young black guy are immediately going into that interaction, trying to start trouble, trying to fight, trying to argue, resisting arrest, all of these things, armed without an ID, everything else, well, then at some point the question is, did you put yourself into this situation? Yes, it's an unfortunate outcome, but if you're consistently looking to be in a situation like this and then the natural consequences happen, I have a hard time crying for you. And Jeremy, I think that was your point, that a lot of libertarians were very angry with you online. They were angry at me too. We did point out that perhaps Ron Paul was not making the best decision there, and man, did that make a lot of people angry. But that seemed to be the issue that they simply could not grasp. Like, yes, perhaps agents of the state did not have the best optics in the scenario. Some part of this could have gone better, but the like intense reaction to just say, and now ICE has to give up and we're losing everything and we have to get out of there and give the left exactly what they wanted to manufacture. Like, it just seems so short-sighted.
Yeah, look, I think it's entirely appropriate to be critical of the Trump administration or any of these people who have said that you don't have the right or you shouldn't be carrying a firearm at a protest. This is entirely your right as an American. I've been to protests here in New Hampshire where there were dozens, if not hundreds of people, who were carrying. No one got shot. Okay. Yeah, it does. When you start, and look, I've been arrested on purpose more than once. Well, actually, only once on purpose, once by accident. But in both cases, I was not disobeying a police officer. I was wholly compliant. This is that is the role that they are playing, and it is an interaction that is inherently dangerous. Like, this is not. They do have guns. They do have the ability to kill you. And this idea that this interaction can be that you can be disobedient, and that this is supposed to be risk free is clearly fallacious. That can't make sense. And so there is an extent, and especially libertarians who are supposed to understand trade-offs, who are supposed to be able to think like economically. Like, okay, there has to be a rate. Like, the amount of times that someone resisting arrest ends up killed over a long enough time series or over enough incidents, it cannot be zero. Like, it's like, it's the same thinking of like, if you've flown hundreds of times, you probably should have missed a flight, like, or you're getting to the airport too. Like the optimal amount of violence in response to resistance cannot be zero. That's not an equilibrium that works. And so, like, there could be an argument that they're being too violent, that they're being too dangerous, but you can't deduce that from one interaction. And so to say from one interaction that therefore, we need to abolish ICE and ICE needs to, quit doing what they're doing, That's a ludicrous response. There could be more substantive claims about how ICE is acting and this kind of stuff, but you can't deduce it from, one person who is disobeying. And it wasn't, again, I do think it was a bad outcome, but you can't go from one bad outcome and say, hey, we've got to stop doing this entirely. That doesn't make any sense. And of course, we're not seeing this in other places. This isn't happening in New Hampshire. This isn't happening in Texas. This isn't happening in Florida. This is happening in places where the state government is resisting, is fighting, where there's organized opposition. So this was not just this random incident because ICE behaves this way. This was part of a systematic resistance that is specific to Minnesota and a minority of places.
Yeah, I should say that there's famously video of you like screaming at federal agents who show up at your house. So, it's not.
I don't think I screamed at them after they drove away, maybe. But no, look, I know, and I have pushed them. There's a video that I should probably upload. There's a video that very few people have seen comparatively, because it was before I was like kind of internet famous, where I had moved to New Hampshire. I'd only been here for a year or two, and I intentionally got arrested in like 2017 or so because the house I was living in had like a shared back L driveway, and that's how everyone in this block got in and out of the property. And the police had both sides blocked off for like 8 hours, and they had said that there was someone in this building over there that was like barricaded. And I was like, look, I consent to the risk that this guy somehow shoots a bullet out of the window and hits me when I'm leaving. Like, I don't consent to being trapped in my house by the police. Like, the police work for the citizens. Like, you are making this independent risk assessment. Like, we don't agree. Like, I'm happy. Please let me leave with my car so that I can go and pick my child up, from school or whatever. It wasn't school. They were somewhere else, but I needed to go and pick up my kid. And I was trapped in my own house by the police whose salary I pay. And I said, like, I would like to leave. They said, you can't. And I said, what would happen if I attempt to leave? They said, you'll get arrested. And I said, arrest me. And I got arrested. But to me, that's how, if you're going to, that's how you do it. Like I said, look, I'm willing to get arrested. And then, by the way, they dropped the charges. They chose not to pursue it. And to me, and so I still do believe that police can overreach. Like, I don't believe the police whose salary I pay should keep me safe from things I'm saying I don't want to be kept safe from, So anyway, I am still a libertarian. I am still willing to, resist the government when I think that they're overreaching. But I also understand that if I'm going to directly disobey a cop in a physical way, I'm taking my own life into my hands. And I don't think I think that's the only reasonable way to think about this.
Well, and there is, of course, a long tradition of civil disobedience, but it's understood, as you say, if you're going to put yourself in a position where you're going to get arrested, you probably shouldn't arm yourself in a way that's you're also going to, like, when you get arrested, end up exchanging fire. The point is, I know what's coming. I have prepared for this scenario. I'm going to de-escalate the consequences when it happens, so that if I'm trying to make that point, I'm making that point without like getting in a gunfight. That's not the objective, even if you are intentionally looking to get arrested and make a point in civil disobedience. The whole point is you're the peaceful one. They're the one with violence. That's the dynamic you're trying to show, the injustice of the violence. If you show up with a gun, okay, well, now you're just in a gunfight, right? Like, and again, I'm not against people having guns. I've, carried a gun for many decades. I've interacted with law enforcement, been to protests with one on me. It's fine. I'm just saying, I don't put myself in those situations. It's really not that hard, even when you have a gun on, to know how you should be behaving in that scenario. But this really does just, I think, underlie the larger problem, which Jeremy identified early on, which is there's just those instincts in libertarians when it comes to seeing the state do anything, right? Like, but it does seem like the defection does come pretty consistently, specifically with immigration, Spoon, because I know that libertarians, they need to say, at least the sane ones need to say, we're against open borders. Like, they recognize at some level, even if that like will have some impact on their abstract libertarian understanding, that it's just an unwinnable position. It's ultimately just unfeasible to maintain an open border. Whatever libertarian understanding of free movement of people simply cannot apply to everybody. They say that, but then just kind of really reliably when it comes time to vote on, border issues or support the president on border issue. We just don't see it. Like, I like Thomas Massey and Rand Paul on a lot of stuff, but I consistently make libertarians angry because I say they're going to betray me on the border. They always betray me on the border. And this is my problem, because the border is the existential issue, right? Without a border, the country is over. Without deportations, the democratic system simply cannot continue as it's going. And so if you are a libertarian and you want to maintain any understanding of your libertarian principles, you have to have a system in which you can't just let people in who aren't libertarian. Like, that's just the most basic thing in the world. But libertarians never seem to follow through. They always defect specifically on this issue and kind of help out the left. Why is it this issue in particular? Because I don't think it's just the use of government, though I think that is a consistent impulse. But for some reason, specifically when it comes to immigration, we see over and over again, they talk the talk, but when the walk comes, it's always defect.
I wonder how much of that is demographic. Because I feel like if I look at that just from an outside perspective, it seems to me there's just a fear of we either get Weimar Republic or the Third Reich. Like, there's no middle between those two. It's like, yes, you can't let in everyone into the world, but then you're still going to rely on the state to, okay, well, who gets to decide who comes in? And if you went by, okay, let's just be brutally honest, if you went by, okay, purely talent and like actually competent talent, not just flood the place with H-1Bs, you're looking at like parts of China, maybe mostly Japan, Korea, and Western Europe. That's basically the only immigrants you will ever take in, because they would be top-notch performers. They would also be culturally compatible with Western values, because that's where your original stock comes from. That's just the reality. If you want a functioning nation state and you want the state to continue the way it is, that's the people you want to bring in. Everyone else, you tend to just cause chaos. It's just call a spade a spade.
Yeah, and Jeremy, this is something I've seen you comment on again regularly, which is something many libertarians won't address. But you said something pretty similar. I think I actually saw that on your Twitter today, saying something like, basically libertarianism is for 115 IQ Anglos. That's who can do it. And
so well done.
Yeah, and so if you do select specifically for the ability to live in those type of societies, you will demographically produce a specific outcome. Do you think that is something that weighs on the minds of many libertarians when they're kind of bailing out of the border situation?
Yeah, well, that's one of the drums I beat regularly, although I think it is important to understand that it's libertarians are disproportionately Anglo, not necessarily all Anglos are disproportionately libertarian.
Sure, absolutely, of course.
And so sometimes people struggle with that second part of it, but not saying the people here. I think, I wanted to bring it back a little bit to your comments about Paul and Massey and like why libertarians kind of trend in this way, and because I can't, like, I have different positions on this issue than I did 10 to 15 years ago, and because there really are very good, and in fact, if I have an issue with sort of the right in general, where I wish they could appreciate this idea from libertarians, it's the idea of markets, the benefits of markets, that markets are this really special thing. They produce incredible coordination between humans, and they're responsible for a lot of the good parts of our modern world. And I often find that people on the right, some people on the right or some conservatives, want to solve problems in ways that are anti-market, where a market, even if you want to solve the problem, a market would solve the problem in a better way than the proposed conservative solution. And so I think the impulse here is because it is true. Like, it is true that we could take someone from, Haiti or wherever, and like they would be more economically productive here. Some of them would be worth, nothing, but some of them would actually be more economically productive here. I think that is a true claim. We can debate it if you want, but I think that's a true claim. And so, there's this impulse that's like, oh, well, like we could all be, more prosperous. We don't want to get in the way of a market, and labor is a market just like other things. What these types of libertarians miss is that these people come with negative externalities in libertarian terms. There are costs that aren't borne by the employer who is doing the hiring. And there are aspects of our society culturally, in terms of how our courts work, in terms of having, order in our local parks and our local environments and so on, that aren't borne by the employer. And these people, if you have too many people who don't share your way of thinking, you will stop having the things that you value about your society. But the reason that I think libertarians end up reflexively in this position, at least some of them, is because they appreciate markets and that they apply that impulse to the market, for labor.
But I think this is like this is like trying to be nicer than Jesus. It's Ricardo didn't believe in free movement of labor when he was coming up with a comparative theory of advantage, right? Like that was the whole point, was like that you would favor your country and you would, like, capital and labor would largely be fixed. And that's why comparative advantage.
I'm here on the show as a libertarian, so I've got to defend my people. I'm not just going to be here and trash them and say the libertarians are awful. I tend to think that even when I disagree with the libertarians, the impulse is coming from a good place, and so I'm going to defend where that's
sure. But look, so I want to say this because I know I give libertarians a lot of crap. I get that. And people will often say, well, then why are you talking to them all the time? Why are you and Tom Woods friendly? Like, I don't get it. And it's like, well, because actually I think libertarians are so close, and that's why I'm so hard on them, because they're close to the answer. But this is the beauty. Okay, so I'm probably not telling you anything you don't know, but for the audience that, members who may not have been familiar, like, this was the whole point of neo-reaction. Like, this was the beautiful synthesis, right? This is why everybody in neo-reaction was a post-libertarian, because the whole point was, we know this isn't going to work by itself. So Hoppe's right about, like, a lot. However, like, you need authoritarianism on the outside and libertarianism on the inside. You need the hard shell so you can have the soft, chocolatey center. So, we want a high degree of order and, a high degree of power in the ability to maintain the state and keep people who shouldn't be here out. But once it comes to the internal workings, we want a fairly open society, right? Like that's the model. That was the whole NRX model. Libertarianism in one state, if you will. And so that was kind of the whole idea. And this should be like the solution to this problem. This is always what I'm trying to get libertarians over the line on. They're like, oh, you're an authoritarian. I'm like, well, only in one way, like in exactly one way. But it's the way that allows me to not be an authoritarian everywhere else. And if you don't do this one thing, you don't maintain order in this one thing, then you don't get to have the freedom in any other aspect. And that's why I'm hard on libertarians. That's why I'm beating them. It's not because I hate them. It's because they're so close to the answer, and I need them to get over the line.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's a classic sort of Freud called it the narcissism of small differences. Rene Girard has this quote about, the people that we always want to condemn the most are our neighbors. And it's because we are close. We have a lot of overlap, and it's like we're that much more frustrated, by the small differences. So I do think it makes sense that drives a lot of it.
Spoon,
Can I steal man the authoritarianism?
I'm sorry.
For a moment. So can I steal man the authoritarianism for a moment?
Yes, by all means. I was actually going to pivot to you on this, so go for it. Yeah,
because I've spoken to Europeans and Americans about this, and okay, how can I say this in a nice way that doesn't come off as too mean? I feel like I'm talking to two different species of people when it comes to this kind of stuff, because I feel like to Europeans, authoritarianism is action. To Americans, authoritarianism is structured, in the sense that to us, or rather to the Americans, is that if you basically do, because I asked a friend of mine about this, I said to him, because he's an American, I said, tell me if you agree with this. To an American, authoritarianism is the state does something I don't like expediently. And he said, yes. So it's not a focus on is the state doing something that it can or shouldn't do. It's more just it's doing it in a way that I don't like. Even if it is a competent statecraft orientated action, it seems to be more very heavily focused on the state should not be able to do this and therefore it's bad. And so when I sort of look at basically anything that the state does in the American sense, I've noticed a lot of the protest on it is very much driven by it's violating a sense of structure, and there's very little conversation, if any at all, about what should people in government actually do with power, especially when it's limited by the Constitution, when sort of a lot of people are going, if it's hampering us in a way from actually executing what a functioning state should look like, it's becoming a burden in a way that Americans find very difficult to move away from, because that's basically all they know.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And this is why, so one of my issues is trying to shift. Americans have been told that small government is a goal. And I think that small government is generally good because it allows for the cultivation of virtue. But I don't think that the smallness of the government itself is the actual goal. And I think that's what gets Americans so confused. Rather than
it's competence.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
Yes.
And rather than asking, is what's happening here good for the people or not? The question is just, is there less government? And sometimes the answer is less government is the good thing. And in fact, it's probably the answer more often than not. But I think making that your only gauge is the problem. I am Aristotelian in the sense of, I think we have a telos as a people. I think we should be orienting ourselves towards an end and a shared outcome. And what does that, what gets us there, is the good. That is the positive thing. Now, for Americans, I think our telos is one that is largely one of liberty and small government. I think that does actually get us where we want to go. But the point is where we want to go. And if the government being smaller in an area helps us, then we should do it. But if the government, doing something critical will help us along that line, that's okay. That is not in and of itself an evil. I don't want to abolish the state. And I don't think that ultimately that is the answer. I do want a smaller state when it achieves the type of goal we're looking for. But I think you're right, Spoon, that just having that singular goal of small government as the only end of our understanding of like how we should govern or how we should be ruled, I do think that does, run us into a problem with a lot of American conservatism and libertarianism. But I don't know, Jeremy, do you entirely disagree with that? Have we?
No. I mean, I would say I broadly disagree with that. I mean, I'm often having these debates as well about, these one term for them is sort of these naptists, these like nap absolutists, where they're like, well, all I have to do is never violate the nap, and I don't have to consider the consequences. And I don't really get this thinking. You have to consider the consequences at some point. Like if literally just following the nap resulted in the destruction of, everything, your family, your way of life, then like I would just violate the nap. It just doesn't even seem like a hard choice. To defend these people a little bit, like there are consequential reasons that we want a nap-like or deontological rule-based government, which is that it's predictable, which is that we can predict how the government will act and how others will act towards us. I would posit that this is still a consequence. So it's still ultimately something that we value because of the results to some degree. But, like there's these classic trolley arguments, like, would you pull the trolley lever to save, 5 for 1? And then they do this other one of like, would you push a fat man off of a bridge, to save 5 lives, right? Like, and a lot of people will say, well, I would pull the trolley lever to save 5 instead of 1, but I wouldn't push the fat man off the bridge to save 5 lives. These are the most common answers that people give. And some ethicists and philosophers like to say that these answers are contradictory, but I actually don't think that they are. They're speaking to the type of society that we want to live in. If there's some contrived scenario where I have to pull a lever, yeah, pull the lever. What is this? This isn't like a real thing that happens in the real world. But in the real world, I don't want to worry that I go into my doctor and he chooses to harvest my organs because it would save 5 lives instead of 1, and it would be more, efficient or whatever, And so I think to defend sort of the nap-ish positions in a consequential way, it's about having a government or having a state whose behavior is predictable, that won't arbitrarily violate rights because it produces good consequences.
Yeah, and of course I understand that to an extent, but this is, I think, ultimately the problem with this understanding of human nature and structuring society, you can never actually do that, right? And there's a goal of reducing the arbitrary nature as much as possible, right? But this is kind of the entire point of Joseph de Maistre or Carl Schmitt. Eventually, someone always decides, right? There's always the exception, and so you can structure your system to be as predictable as you can for as long as you can. But at some point, it comes down to, do you have a good ruler? Do you have somebody who's ruling in the interests of your people? When the exception comes, when the decision comes, are you willing to take those steps? And I think that's the thing that's so hard for many libertarians to get. It's like this binary of either you're licking the boot of Stalin, or you are like just this nap following Ron Paul acolyte. And the answer is no. Like, you can actually find a ground where you are making the government as predictable as possible, as non-arbitrary as possible, but recognizing that when that moment comes, you do actually have to care who's in charge, and they will be making decisions, and that reality is going to come. And in that moment, like, maybe the thing isn't to defect. Maybe the thing to do is recognize, okay, while generally I would prefer not to have this level of authority being exercised, like you said, I'm not going to avoid violating the NAP if my wife and kids' lives are on the line. And if my country's on the line, then, we figure it out. Like, not to get too crazy on you, but he who, saves his country violates no law at the end of the day.
I do think immigration approaches lifeboat type scenarios. That's what they're often called in the like, it's a lifeboat scenario. Should you violate, should you violate the non-aggression principle in a lifeboat scenario? And yeah, I do think immigration approaches these types of scenarios. And I have this argument with libertarians all the time. It's always ultimately ruled by men. Like, you can imagine your perfect decentralized anarcho-capitalist patchwork utopia, whatever system that you're imagining. There's still judges who are resolving disputes. There's still armed men who are the enforcers, should that disagreement require actual violence. And so even because I do really want, I do still like the spirit of a lot of these people, even if I think they're naive or foolish. Like, I like it. Like, I think a world in which they were in charge would mostly be a better one. But I want them to imagine, because if they could get the last part of like, okay, how would you now maintain a system of judges that makes the type of rulings that you want? Right. They would get the last piece of the puzzle, which is you have to make sure that the population is compatible, is going to produce these kinds of judges. And because that's really just the one piece that they're missing. Like that impulse towards, because this is part of the problem with mass immigration, is they don't have this impulse towards universal fairness. They're clannish. They will not be consistent. You can't trust them on a jury. You can't trust them to return the shopping cart. And of course, not returning the shopping cart is not in my rational self-interest. It's not a Randian. I mean, it's an act in certain. It's rational self-interest in my self-conception of like an ethical being, but it's not in the, it's costing me time. It's costing me, and so getting this through these people's heads, that the psychology that even allows them to think this way is so rare, is special psychology, and it will die if you don't ensure that the population is compatible enough.
Now, I will say this, Spoon. We've spoken about libertarianism as kind of the default setting for many Anglos. Not as Jeremy pointed out the entirety, but that you're going to have more of those than anyone else. But at the same time, that doesn't seem that a lot of Northern Europeans necessarily are pushing for a whole lot of libertarianism. So to play devil's advocate here. Is that even with these stronger states, these states that are increasingly becoming more authoritarian in a lot of ways, they seem to also not care about their borders. So the increase in authoritarianism in many Northern European countries doesn't seem to be benefiting the people in the case of the border security area. So it just not that, again, we were doing much better over in America, but it just I think a libertarian would probably point that out, right? Would say, well, that authoritarianism isn't really helping the Europeans with this problem either. So why is it so great?
Yeah, I would, to come back to Jeremy's point, I think it ultimately comes down to we need better rulers and like an actual class kind of sense. Because I feel like, as a monarchist, I hate saying this because it's kind of cringe, but one of the things I've realized, if you try to pitch the idea of monarchy to people as a concept, they imagine the people in charge now with more power, and that scares the crap out of them.
Yes.
It's not that they can't imagine a good ruler, it's that they can't imagine anyone now, because no one in charge of governments, pretty much anywhere in the Western world, looks like they could run a freaking McDonald's, let alone a nation. And so when you're sort of pitching them idea of a libertarian society, they just sort of look at things and go, okay, these ideas that you wish to have in place, these are not ideas that are universalized literally ever. We can't even get democracy to freaking work with multi-ethnic societies. So how are you going to do libertarianism, I think, is kind of insane if you look at it from that way. I would say the one thing that markets do not do is it does a really bad job of valuing something that isn't measured with raw dollars.
I agree with that, by the way. So
yes, that is one thing. Like the moment you say to people, okay, look, your perfect society that you wish to have, there are things that we want in our society that isn't measured with hard currency, and you wish the state to sort of, I don't want to say like step on the pedal here, but you need the state to act in a way that is in the interest of the people and that isn't just maximizing profit. And that's where things get dicey, because once you realize that people wish to have a society that isn't just based on who can give me the most amount of money, it tends to snowball into culture, which snowballs into race and ethnicity. And then you're like, everyone else thinks if you go down this road, this will inevitably enter the Third Reich. Which I think is ridiculous, because like literally every society ever prior to, like, I don't know, 1960 Civil Rights Act was this society. It's like you just basically got the 60s and go, okay, we're going to ignore all of human history and try this insane experiment that has never worked ever. And you've been warned for like, I don't know, 70, 80 years. This is going to get the result that this isn't going to work. But Lord knows why we're going on that road.
What do you guys think about attempts to sort of blend immigration systems with markets? Like, one could imagine something like some sort of, insurance system where someone is being assessed for their compatibility and they're assigned, some sort of risk. And so it would be very, very expensive because these people, for certain people, it would be, cheap or very affordable if you're, say, a Western European, but you're being assessed in risk. You have to pay an amount of money. And if you're deemed incompatible, you can still be removed. There's some sort of process for this.
I think that we're calling that a market, but really, and yeah, in a way, we've marketized, we've made that an economic decision. But this is just the way that immigration worked or was supposed to work for a very long time. Like Aristotle was talking about this. Like you have a sponsorship, you bring someone in. You are responsible for that person while you're there. This is what Hoppe basically like reiterated in Democracy, the God That Failed, right? Like that you'd have the covenantal community and you have to sponsor the person to come in and you're responsible ultimately, those are solutions. I don't know if they're market solutions. It's just as like the way the world had worked. There's a reason that Aquinas picks up the 3 generations a model of immigration again from Aristotle, because like that's the natural amount of time it would take to vet your family over time to see if they are part of and compatible with the community. So yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you're saying there, but I think we're just taking like classic wisdom and trying to turn it into economics there more than we are, coming up with a solution that's novel in any way.
Well, I guess you're under democracy, like a lot of the solutions are, to me at least, in America, and I will admit I don't know all this history, so I should probably learn some more, but we're using democracy, we elect representatives and the representatives vote, and they often produce, it's a quota system. We can handle this many, and of course, pre-hard sellers, different quotas, now we have different quotas today, but in basically for America and for a long time, it's been a quota system. And in a market system, you might have sliding scale pricing. You might have the prices get more expensive as more people want to come. But it's part of what makes it different. And again, this is part of where I often do, break with substantial portions of the right is, I think anytime you're using a quota system, anytime you're having democracy produce an exact number, you aren't in market territory. Whereas a market-like system would be somewhat more free-floating, would allow for various parties to be participating in a sort of more bottom-up way, as opposed to a top-down singular design.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's certainly merits to the suggestion. I'm just not sure if we are in some ways transposing what would just be ancient wisdom on
this is
on
utopian thinking. It's not on the table politically, so I'm not.
Sure.
It's not going to happen.
It would certainly be an improvement over what we have now. I would easily vote for it over our current understanding.
I have somewhat skeptical of a meritocratic world, and I will just pitch this sentence: the best person for the job is not always the right person for the job.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with that, and
Yeah.
Can you expand on that?
Okay. Let's just say if you're looking at a sport team, you have like 15 best players on a rugby field, for example. Statistically, I can guarantee you the best person is not going to be as good as like 15 players who play together well, because you need to know how do they play with each other. Like, for example, in rugby, there's people that are far more kicking orientated. There's people that are far more passing orientated. And you can look at the people and go, okay, this is the person that makes the most line breaks. This is the person that can pass better. But you need to get them in a way that, okay, this person's like running game is really good, compatible with the 9 that plays really fast. So you can get all these people that go, okay, statistically, I can get this person, this person, this person, because these are all the stats that I'm looking for. But if I put them in the team, those stats are not really compatible with each other. So you need to have the people who can play well together, because that's what makes the best team. It isn't just an individual. It's how well can those individual components like collectively crank and fire.
Gotcha. Yeah. I think that makes perfect sense. It probably gets semantic on what best means, but with that definition, yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, it's the old Moneyball issue, right? Like at some point they thought, okay, well, if we just crunch statistics properly, we're going to produce the best outcome. But this isn't true in anything sports or real life. And that is ultimately the problem I think a lot of libertarians have. It is a useful tool in certain situations, but it's the attempt to turn it into a universal moral philosophy, way to view the world, everything. You're just become a Marxist. You just become a materialist. Everything is something I can, work out on, on some kind of spreadsheet and some kind of formula. It's too obsessed with hyper rationalization. I've said this before, and I really mean it. Libertarianism is the attempt to replace God with contract law, which therefore makes it like the most Anglo thing you can ever imagine. Like, but it really is this desire to say, well, we don't need authority. We don't need the possibility of human interaction, because we can quantify everything and freeze it in place. And of course, there are many amazing things you can do with this. But ultimately, if you just view the world this way, you're going to end up in, I think, the disasters that we often end up in. And that's not just libertarian, and that's not just a libertarian problem. That's a modernity problem. But libertarians are just participating.
I'd be a little bit mixed here, because I used to be a huge sabermetrics sports nerd guy. That's probably not surprising given my personality, but it is clearly true that this stuff, there was a lot discovered via sabermetrics. I think it's simultaneously true that you can't purely spreadsheet your way to the best basketball team. Like I wouldn't make that claim either, but I think it's also true that there is hidden value that can be detected via these methods have added value. They don't explain everything. You can't do everything this way. And it's a mistake to lose sight of sort of our instincts and our gut and a sort of more synthetic judgment. But at the same time, I think there has been added value from some of this stuff. So I would say my answer is like a bit complex, but I wouldn't want to throw all that away either.
No, and that's why I'm saying, there is value in parts of the libertarian understanding. I don't want to throw it all away either. Again, like I said, they're so close. That's my whole problem is like, it's like, obviously there is value in this understanding. But like I said, I just think when you try to universalize it, totalize it, that's when you run into the problem. Once you walk away from putting those revelations that libertarian understandings can bring into wider contexts, that's what gets, I think, people into trouble. But I'm certainly not saying there's no value in this any more than there's no value in statistics in sports. Like, yes, these things are valuable, but if you live and die by them, if you're trying to run your company and the only thing you can see is the spreadsheet and not like, actually maybe that Indian cheap labor isn't the best for my bottom line because it's going to have, some problems down the line. Like, until you can understand that and have that total understanding, then it kind of ends up hurting you at the end. All right, guys. Well, we have some super chats stacking up here, so we should get to them. So we're not here forever. Before we move over to the questions of the people, Jeremy, where can people find your work? What are you up to?
Yeah, I'm most active on x.com/Jeremy Kauffman. I rarely do video stuff, but I'm actually going to be doing a live stream on Monday night at 6:30 p.m. Eastern on my YouTube channel, which is Jeremy Kauffman NH. And for anyone curious about New Hampshire, this is an excellent, and it's scheduled. You can turn on the bell or whatever. This is going to be an excellent chance for anyone who's curious about the Free State Movement to learn more about it. So follow me on X or catch me on YouTube on Monday night.
Excellent. And Spoon, where can people find your work?
It's here on YouTube under Aristocratic Utensil, and it's on Twitter as well, or X as we now call it, although I know you don't like doing that. Or
Never.
No. I have to because it's a South African that owns in there, so I'm compelled by national loyalty.
It sounds like you're posting on a pornography site. Is it just me? No? Like, I don't know. Anyway.
If it was XXX, I could understand, but if it's just
right,
X,
yeah.
Then but Aris_utensil you'll get me on Twitter there.
Excellent. All right. Well, I appreciate the South African solidarity there. Let's see. Red Dragon says, we libertarians love to say don't hurt people and don't take their stuff, and many forgot that this relies on everyone broadly agreeing on what those words mean. Yeah, absolutely true. And Jeremy's point, I think that the problem with libertarianism is trying to remember that not everyone's a libertarian. Like, that's pretty critical.
That's a man who gets it. That's the key question. That's a man who gets it. I'll say that.
Cherry Coke Nixon says, Lolberts continued to take L's. First, their neoliberal economics were discredited, and now their social beliefs too. Nixon greater than Goldwater every single time.
Oh, I'm still a Goldwater American, so we'll have to fight. I don't know.
I mean, at the very least, he did push back against the Civil Rights Act, so you gotta give him credit there.
Well, Nixon said a lot of crazy stuff, and by I don't mean like in a bad way, like just like openly like writing on the wall, like these people are the enemies, and it's literally everyone we can't stand today. It's like Nixon was way ahead of the curve.
Whatever you do, don't listen to the tape conversation between him and Billy Graham in the White House. Moving on.
Oh God, some of them are hilarious.
Dan says, how do we help our dear academic friends suffering from TDS and seeing everything through slop vision? I've just Dan, I've just kind of steered clear on that one. Unfortunately, look, I get it. But I don't know. I guess this is probably a better question for the Aristocratic Utensil here. But it does. I understand why some of what MAGA says or does has driven some of the Europeans crazy. But there does seem to be a healthy dose of Trump derangement syndrome that is swept through. Again, I'm not saying don't criticize Trump. I'm just saying there has become a little bit of an obsession with current hatred of Trump at the moment, and it does seem to be skewing. So some of the takes coming out of the right-wing Eurosphere. I don't know if you want to speak to that at all.
Am I to defend my fellow Europeans here for a moment?
You defend, attack, whatever you like to do with it.
I have greatly
more
annoyed
insight than I would have. I have largely, like I said, avoided the phenomenon because most of these people are my friends, but it has been hard to not notice.
Yeah, I've generally annoyed my audience with that lately because I've seen some of the Europeans defend Trump while also admitting that he has destroyed anything right-wing in Europe. And just from my perspective, I'm going, okay, if you can acknowledge he's wrecking any right-wing movement in Europe, why the hell are you cheering for this man? That makes no sense. like just purely from the interest of your kin. And if your interests are not being met, they're actually being damaged by a foreign power, then yes, I would absolutely oppose everything that Trump does just because I'm not American. Like, if it's an Englishman cheering for that shit, I think that's insane. If it's a European saying, yeah, I'm going to oppose this, I can understand. So for me, it's just a perspective of what side of the aisle are you on. If you're a European and you wish to get under the thumb of the American empire and you see the American empire weakening you, I would absolutely understand if they oppose the Americans.
Sure. I guess the biggest problem for people is like they forget that nationalism means actually looking out for your nation's interests. And so the funniest thing is like you have like this international alliance of nationalists, and it's like, all right, well, we're pro, nationalism and particularism until we actually start thinking about our own nations. Then it's like, what do you mean you're not an international friend of the nationalists? That seems to be the dichotomy.
I also think YouTube skews largely American. And I think for a lot of the Europeans, they don't wish to annoy their American audience. So they are more sort of, playing friendly with them. Whereas I don't give a rat's ass. I'll offend anyone. I don't care who you are. If you have a crappy take, I'll give you hell for it because that's just the right thing to do.
Well, I think also, to be fair to some of the European commentators, there is a scenario where you appreciate Trump acting in the interest of his own nation and you want to see that for your own nation, even if you don't like that his actions are having a negative impact on your movement, right? So I guess there's kind of that as well.
Yeah.
Nixon also says, Lorbert's trying to fit in with the leftist theater kids by reminding them they share views on the cool issues against the locker stuffing chuds. I do think that does happen sometimes, but I think in this case, it really is just an expression of state power thing. There are situations in which I do think, especially some libertarians will side with the leftists because it will get them, it's easier. It doesn't push, it doesn't trigger the defense mechanisms of the regime. But in this case, I really do think it is mainly just the utilization of state power that they're kind of kicking back against automatically.
Some libertarians are actually leftists.
Right.
Not everyone had a problem. Some of them just actually genuinely are dispositionally leftists.
That is actually absolutely true. I mean, we don't even get me into the last candidate for the Libertarian Party. Aramaic Discourse says most of the libertarians seem to be political astrology. Pretty sure I'm not the only one who has thought this. I mean, it is an identity, to be sure. In some cases there are people who are just libertarians because that is like their thing. That is their identity. That is their brand. But I don't know if astrology so much. I mean, though, at some point, all political labels are that, right? Like, what? Oh, are you a monarchist, NRX? Are you libertarian? What's your obscure niche? Internet.
Yes to all of those.
Theory. Yeah, all at once. Yes, that is a great thing. In NRX, you can contain multitudes. Yes. Nixon says comic Dave Smith in shambles. Look, I like Dave. I'm friendly with Dave. He's just wrong on this one. It's okay. He'll be right on another one. But I haven't gone too hard at him, though. I did. He was yelling at Matt Walsh about debates, and I was like, I'll be a Huckleberry. Let's.
I offered as well.
I never got a response to that. So we'll see where Dave goes. Nixon also says, Cato, we have no borders and no welfare. Lol. Oh, so at first I was actually thinking of the Roman Cato, and I was like, I don't remember Cato being against border. It took me a minute, but yes, yeah. Cato
Institute, yes.
100%, yes. Thuggo says, libertarians think everyone is a rational economic actor, but real humans pursue their interests, commit crimes, make alliances, influences. I mean, this is true, though, to be fair. I do think that libertarians do factor in, that people have non-economic interests as well. They just tend to think that they eventually manifest themselves economically. And this is where we talked about there being limitations to economic expressions of reality.
Yeah, that's still, I mean, that would rationality involves pursuing your interest. That doesn't have to, in terms of man being a rational, whatever, that doesn't mean just economically. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Nixon says libertarianism requires both an educated and moral population. We have neither. When theory meets reality, it fails. Adams beats Jefferson in reality. Yeah, and again, that's the problem.
Yeah.
As I think we've all kind of agreed here to some extent, libertarianism can only exist in particular circumstances, and you have to be willing to use power to generate those circumstances before you get the libertarianism. It's the order of operations thing that always seems to catch them.
We didn't get into this, and I don't want to start it now, but it's also, if your elites are libertarian and understand the limits for,
Sure.
people who might not be, that's also another way of sort of fusing these things.
Yeah. Let's see here. Nixon also says, thank you for being a good sport, Jeremy. Yes, we should say, I appreciate you stepping to Lion's Den on this one, though. I mean, we're going to be more friendly to you, obviously. But still, yeah, it is largely a stream about dunking on some libertarian ideas. So appreciate you being willing.
I appreciate. I need to find meaner shows. Actually, people are always tuning. I'm like, I want to get in a real fight here, and it never seems to manage to happen.
I mean, if Spoon completely unleashes, he could be rather cruel. We turn a loose on you here. you got that club in your bag. That's. When you set up on somebody, you can get them.
Yeah, I've not really done it in a sort of debate format, because usually if I'm on somebody else's show, my reaction is, okay, it's like being in somebody else's house. So you don't go around, clubbing the windows just for the shits and giggles. If it's on my own one, yes, then I will be ruthless. But on somebody else's show, I'm polite and mannered, as the avatar suggests.
Yeah, and that's been my experience too. Every time I'm supposed to be getting into some knockdown, drag out debate with people, usually once we're in a room, it tends to be a lot more agreement than you'd expect. But that's actually how civilized people conduct themselves. So
yes, good Anglo should.
Exactly. All right, guys. Well, I appreciate both of you gentlemen coming on. It's been fantastic talking with you. Everyone should be checking out both of your works here. So everyone go and follow both Spoon and Jeremy. And of course, if it's your first time on this channel, guys, you need to subscribe on YouTube, click the bell, notifications, all that stuff, so you know when we go live. If you want to get these broadcasts as podcasts, make sure you subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. And I will be hosting Timcast on Monday. So if you'd like to watch and support and come by and say something kind to the Timcast crew while I'm there, please make sure to do so. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And as always, I will talk to you next time.